Lionel, is that you?
There, I think I got it. Dave?
Lionel.
Dave, I think our guest is moving his microphone.
Well, he's excited to get on the stage, and I don't blame him.
And now he's talking. It's like it's showbiz.
Exactly.
Da 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 da. That's the Carson Show. This is it. The Night of Nights. That was my favorite intro. The Bugs Bunny.
Keep singing. Keep singing.
The Bugs Bunny Show. This is it. The Night of Nights. Da 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 da. What's your favorite kid show, Dave?
Oh, I loved Voltron. and Transformers from the 80s. Those are probably my favorite cartoons. Yeah, although we love the Muppet Show too. The Muppet Show was great.
I'd forgot about Transformers. I guess that'd be about your time, wouldn't it? Yeah,
they went through a couple of iterations, but the original one, with I think they were called the Autobots and the Decepticons or something. You had the automobiles and the trucks that turned into robots, and then there were the good robots, and then there was a bunch of bad robots as well, and they would change back and forth to fight each other. But it was exciting. It was a good cartoon.
It was. And did you end up with a box full of Transformers that you got for your birthday and Christmas and all that stuff?
Yeah. Oh, we asked for it. We were thrilled when we got that stuff. And like any good fad, we had a bunch of them, and they're all gone. I don't know what happened to any of them. One of many reasons why model railroading is more rewarding than the fad hobbies.
Here's a question for you that I don't understand the answer. Well, I understand one. Do you have any of your train stuff from when you were a kid?
I have a handful of pieces, yes.
See, I don't have any of my stuff.
I mean, admittedly, the stuff from the late 70s and early 80s, it was not a grand time for the hobby, in my opinion, as far as the quality of equipment, unless you built it yourself.
So I don't have any of my old stuff, and I don't really understand why a 65-year-old man would have his own old stuff from being a kid, but lots of people seem to take great pride in that.
Yes, I think a lot. It elicits a lot of strong memories for people.
Okay,
and I think that there's value in that. Again, one of the powers to the hobby to me is the fact that you can grow with it. And there are certainly hobbies, slot car racing or military modeling or model airplanes or model jets. Those things that you can get to work where those hobbies can grow with you as well. But a lot of the fad hobbies, the Transformers or Voltron, like I was talking about, they're neat toys. And in some cases, they were really nice toys when we were little, but they are what they are. They're never going to be working by themselves, at least not on a large scale. If you're Martin Jenkins or somebody that can figure out how to put all these unbelievable motors in these little models and make them drive around on their own, that's a different story. But Martin is very talented.
He's very talented. He's also Australian. Which we won't hold against him.
No, I love Australia.
Exactly. Yes. You've been to Australia, haven't you?
I've been to Australia, yes.
Is there any place you haven't been?
Yes. The more you travel, the more you realize you haven't been anywhere.
Have you ever been to Disney World?
Yes.
Oh, you have?
Yes.
Oh, but you won't let your kids go. Nice. Real nice.
If my kids want to go, they can go. We'll all go.
Well, how did you end up there?
My parents took me.
Isn't that very nice of them? Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice to be a young child and have parents that care enough to take you to Disney World?
There's a time and a place for everything.
Well, how old were you?
Ooh, the first time.
You've been more than once?
Yeah, twice.
Oh,
actually, 3 times if you count a marching band trip in high school.
So how old were you when you went as your parents took you?
I think I was probably 10 or 9.
Right.
And my brother and sister were both younger.
Right.
And then we went back in high school and I hated it.
It doesn't matter. They took you again when you were in high school?
Yeah, my sister wanted to go.
Why did you hate this? Why did you hate the most magical place on Earth?
Because I wanted to go watch trains someplace. And I wasn't allowed to. Instead, I had to go look at Disney World again. And
How old were you the second time?
I was that happy age of probably 15.
You know what you should have done is taken a copy of the latest copy of Model Railroader with you.
Oh, that's true. That would have made me. In fact, I did bring Model Railroader, and it was my solace, but I wasn't allowed to bring that to the park. I had to experience the park.
You weren't allowed to take the magazine to the park.
That's correct. It had to stay in the room.
You wanted to take the magazine to the park?
It was better than standing in line again for a ride that was average the first time.
Pirates of the Caribbean is not an average ride. Wash your mouth out with soap.
Pirates of the Caribbean. I don't even know if that existed when I went there.
Oh, I am pretty sure it did.
My favorite was Thunder Mountain Railroad.
Okay, there you go.
Predictably, that was good.
You're not hooked up right. You do know that, right?
Oh yeah, well that's I think that's long been well established. That's part of the fun of the game.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, tonight we have this is an episode. We're going to interview somebody. We're going to.
I'm very excited. Yes,
we're going to interview a magazine editor, and this is primarily mostly your fault.
Okay.
Because you're so excited about this magazine, and you're so excited about your relationship with this gentleman that I thought it done. I woke up one morning, bolt upright in bed, and went, "You know what we got to do? We got to get Dave and Eric together on the podcast."
Well, this is high praise, and I'm very excited to be here. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's praise so much as it's just was kind of relieving the pressure from me to get this job over with.
Well, hey, look, you got to take it where you can get it in life. Praise is hard to come by.
It's not that I don't want to have Eric on here. It's just that I needed to get it done so that you would stop bugging me.
Well, that's honest. Okay.
I'm looking for. Go get Eric out of the green room, and we'll see.
All right. Here we'll walk down the hall in here. Okay.
Eric.
All right, Eric, here we go.
Come on in, buddy.
Time to come in? Okay.
Yeah, this is it.
I was enjoying the snacks.
Did you try the green shrimp?
Oh, that was shrimp?
Well, I guess Eric, you're learning the way we all learn here. It's a very consistent process.
Yeah, it's because it's furry. That's what throws you off.
Yeah. Well, being a journalist all my life, if I see free food, I eat it. So,
have you been a journalist all your life?
Well, not all my life. That's not true.
Most of your adult life?
Most of my productive adult life, yes.
So we should do a proper introductions, shouldn't we, Dave?
I think so. Yes.
So
I think the editor of Model Railroader magazine needs little introduction. I think to most people in the hobby.
Oh, is this Model Railroad? I thought it was Model Rail Journal.
There was so many titles back in the day.
I know, that's part of one of the things I'd like to talk about. Is I was actually thinking about that today. There was a stretch there from the mid 90s to the early 2005, 6, 7, 8. There was a stretch there where I think there was like about 22 different magazines that you could read. Probably early 90s to the mid 2000 and knots. There was Model Railroad Journal. There was Model Railroading. There was
right. That's right. Model Railroading. Right. That was an official title, which is funny because I think at least, and this is something I've actually talked to Eric about in the past is, what we're doing in a lot of cases is modeling railroading when you have operations as part of the hobby, and that title, Model Railroading, is sort of along that line where Model Railroader that's a name. That's the first one I remember as a kid, growing up. That was always on all the shelves at the pharmacy and the bookstore and what have you. And so that was the one that was most commonly picked up. And then Railroad Model Craftsman, of course, right here in New Jersey. So a lot of New Jersey stores had that one as well, from the Carson's Publishing Company. But there had to be 5 or 6 others that I could just recall off the top of my head. And that's not even counting, trains. And I guess Classic Trains is more modern than that. That's probably early 2000s, I would say. I'm just guessing. But yes, So in any case, this is we're introducing Eric White, editor of Model Railroader magazine.
Yes, so it's Eric Wright and our very own Uncle Dave Abelies. Everybody's favorite uncle. He's the guy, Eric, that comes over and he grabs a stick and he starts taking shots, or he grabs the basketball and starts shooting hoops. It's your favorite. It's Uncle Dave. He's the one uncle you're always glad that he's over there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you've probably never heard that. You've probably never heard that term. Well, trust me, it'll get better and better known as the years go by.
Okay.
So, yes. So, Dave talks about you constantly, Eric. And he's talked about you a lot because you were his book editor on his first book, which was
Guide to Signals and Interlocking, if I remember correctly.
Dave.
Correct.
Is
Yes.
that okay? Which sold how many copies by now, Dave?
Well, we're in a second printing. I'm not sure the exact number. I haven't followed up on it in the last couple months. With the people that were in touch with me about that, but we're certainly north of about 6,000 copies, I would say, at this point, Eric. I'm not sure if you something in that vicinity, but it's wonderful. Yeah, I mean it's a dream. It's a dream come true. Without a doubt.
Was one of the most popular selling books Kalmbach ever had, almost.
In recent memory, sure.
Yeah.
And we still have a little ways to go to catch up with John Armstrong's book, but
yes,
it's still doing well.
And which one of John Armstrong wrote more than one book? Did he not?
He did, but Track Planning for Realistic Operation, I think, is probably the best-selling book we have.
Right, yeah. And it still sells, does it not?
It does. We have a new book from Lance Minheim now, which sort of takes off from where John left off. But, we're still selling John's book, I believe.
Yeah, we got to get Lance on here and talk to him about this book. Now, Eric, before I contacted you, had you ever heard of this podcast?
I have to say I had not, no. But then I don't pay much attention to podcasts. So
why not?
Well, I find enough. I mostly listen to things when I'm driving, and my commute to work is short.
Right.
So I put on the radio for a little bit. I drive an old car, so I used to play cassette tapes, but the cassette tape player finally died. So now I'm just stuck with whatever I can get on the radio.
How old is this car?
It's 22 years old.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you've been.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's just how I grew up. I finally, my modern cars have a CD player, Lionel.
There you go. Wow.
But
yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Maybe my next one will have a CD player.
Yeah, it's like this, but it's funny, like, when you take a trip and you drive a rental car, not only is there no CD player, tape player, obviously, but there's all this, like it barks at you when you get close to the line. You're trying to change lanes and the steering wheel shakes, and it's like, what is this? I don't need help changing lanes here. Yeah. But all that kind of stuff is going to drive me nuts when I finally have to get a modern car.
Well, you can turn most of it off.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do.
That's what I do. And well, talk about moving up in technology. You went from an iPhone 10 to an 11.
Yes.
Honestly, Dave, I almost fell off my chair laughing when you told me that.
It was required by work.
Here's a guy that absolutely loves model railroading and is determined to dig in his heels when it comes to technology. I have an 11 and I'm getting I'm going to get a new 14 because I want to stay on the cutting edge of technology.
That's good. I'm glad for you. And I don't have a problem with modern technology that makes things better at all, but I'm going to invest frugally in it because I don't need the newest of everything all the time.
I don't need the newest of everything, but I need the newest of technology. I want to stay abreast of what's happening.
It's a good call.
I don't want to be one of those people that go, nah, I don't need that. And it's like, yeah, as a matter of fact, I feel like I do. I want to stay up with technology this podcast in order to do the best we can with the podcast. Eric?
Yeah, I was never much of a podcast person, like Eric, really, until Rich turned me on to this podcast. And I still don't listen to a lot of other podcasts really much at all. This one I enjoy a lot. There's a lot of interesting people that come across of it. And, it's people that I've come across in other parts of the hobby. But it's definitely it's a pleasure to be here tonight. and talking to Eric for sure.
Yeah, it's just it's complements. It complements the Model Railroad Press. Eric, I'll just tell you this once, but trust me, the AML Nation, of which you're now a part of, had a huge influence in helping sell Dave's first book.
Well, very good.
Yeah.
Then I can't say enough about the wonderfulness of the AML Nation helping to sell Dave's book. And they probably should buy second copies because, one is not enough.
There you go. Well, and Dave's writing another book, so they'll have a chance to continue on the Dave journey.
He is, yes. Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing that. That'll be about yards. And, Dave did a great job with the first book. And now that he's an established expert in the model railroading field, I think people will be clamoring to buy his book as soon as it's announced and available for pre-order.
Hear that, Dave? You're an established expert.
This is heady stuff, guys. I don't know. I'm still sitting in the same basement that I was before anybody had ever heard my name, and I owe a lot of that to Eric. And with Tony Custer's Model Railroad Planning in 2018, Tony and Eric took a chance on me with that, and it's been a pleasure to be able to contribute at this level, without a doubt.
We got a lot of positive, and about it once every 5 to 6 weeks, Eric, Dave, we have what we call Uncle Dave's Fireside Chats on the podcast.
Okay.
And our most recent one, it's not recent now, but it would be recent because this is December the 19th that this is being broadcast. Our most recent one, Fireside Chat number 8, was very popular. We had a lot of positive comments, Dave, about that.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, it's Eric. It's just it's not unlike what we've talked about in the past. Just back and forth about the book writing and articles and stuff. Sort of the philosophy behind why we do what we do, and the social aspect of it, especially with operations, and blending that into sort of life in general. It's fun, and I think one of the things that's neat about the podcast format for myself is that it allows sort of a deep dive into different people's approach to the hobby. And I think it's as Lionel alluded to before, it's a very nice complement towards an article, which is about a specific subject with photographs, and it fits in 6 pages or 8 pages or 4 pages or 10 pages, or depending on the magazine and how it's all put together. But the podcast format allows for a longer, deeper discussion about different aspects of that we just don't have space to print in the media. Mm-hmm. So it's a pretty cool, it's almost like a different genre to me. And sure. I think it fills a niche there, which is really refreshing. It's certainly with people that have a lot of ideas on how they approach the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Well, that's pretty much all the time we have. Well, thanks for coming out, Eric. That was a great interview.
Yeah, that was great. Glad to be here.
Okay, so, but enough about us. So when did you become editor of Model Railroader?
Well, I became what people around there have called the Big E editor officially on June 6th. I had been with Model Railroader almost 9 years now. I started there in February of 2014. Used to be a newspaper editor in suburban Philadelphia, so I grew up not far from where Dave lives. And yeah, we had a few changes. We lost one of our longtime, very popular editors, Jim Rinn, back in the spring, end of last winter. And in finding someone to take his place, that opened up a spot for me at Model Railroader. So
yes, because
that's how I ended up where I am.
That's Carl Swanson was your predecessor, was he not?
Correct, and he's now at Trains.
Who was where Jim Rinn was? He was the editor of that, right?
Correct.
Right. Yep. So yep. Carl went over there, and they looked around the room for the man with the most obvious qualifications, and you were selected.
I guess that would work. Yeah.
So why do you referred to it as the Big E? What does that mean?
Well, in journalism, and we use something called AP style, Associated Press style. There's a book, and it tells you when you should capitalize things and not, amongst other things. And if it's just a job, then you don't capitalize it. But if it's a title, then it gets capitalized. So the editor of a publication, while it's a job, it's also sort of a title as well. So you get that's why you're the Big E editor, is just a as opposed to an editor.
Okay. One of my
cool.
Most of my English, most of my writing ability came from one George Sebastian Coleman, who was an associate editor at Model Railroader.
Sure.
And
I recognize him.
Yeah, he was given the unpleasant task of being my editor. And over a series of many years, I learned a lot about writing and proper grammar and big E's and little E's and all sorts of things.
Well, it's because you take suggestions so well, Lionel. I mean,
exactly. Just like
that's the whole point, right?
Just like somebody I know.
Amen.
And okay, so let's. Have you been a model railroader all your life, Eric?
Well, there were probably a few years when I was really little that I wasn't, but when I was a kid, my dad had Lionel trains, as most kids who were born in the 30s and grew up in the 40s and 50s would have. So I got to play with those. He got me my own Lionel stuff probably in the 60s. I noticed fairly early on that there was this funky third rail in the middle, and I wasn't real excited about that. And so at some point in the early 70s, I guess, when I was probably about 10 or so, I got a Tyco train set. So I just thought that was really great until it broke down about a week after Christmas. And
that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Oh man, yes, they do.
Fortunately, there was a family friend who was a model railroader, and he said, "You need to get him an Athearn engine. That'll last." So that was what happened.
So you basically, except for, I always say, for that whole stretch of college with cars and girls, you've been pretty much a model railroader since you could really conceive what the idea was then.
Pretty much, yeah. And I've always been a model builder. In fact, I was probably more of a car model builder than I was a model railroader at first. I've always been into cars and building model car kits. So my first experiences of getting glue on clear plastic were with model car kits rather than structure kits.
And I remember you talking a little bit about slot cars too, Eric. That's part of what you guys do on a regular basis as well, right?
It is, yeah. When I started, Neil Basugalov was the Big E editor. He's the one who used to use that term, and he said, we all like model trains, but when you work at a model train place 5 days a week and do this for 37.5 hours plus, you kind of get tired of model trains, but you want to do something maybe similar. So they started years before I got there, a slot car round robin group. So there are slot car tracks owned by current and former Kalmbach employees, and we get together about once a month and race at each other's houses.
That's pretty cool.
That's actually really cool. Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, if you check out one of the old midday modelers that we did at David Pop's house in his basement, you can see his racetrack.
Wow, I didn't see it. We've learned something already, Dave.
I think it's great.
We're only 24 minutes in, and we've already learned something.
Well, and I love that kind of camaraderie. I mean, but we've talked about it before on the podcast, and Eric, you and I have talked about it separately as well. But I think that kind of in-person communication, between colleagues at work, that's one of the reasons that our bosses at NJ Transit have gotten us back to the office in the wake of the pandemic, is because there is a lot of cross functionality and good team building that happens because you see each other in the office, and then you go out and do other things afterwards. You get a beer, or you, in this case, go out and race slot cars. So I didn't realize that was as long of a tradition as it is at Kalmbach. That's neat.
Yeah, it's been going on for a while. At one point, we had a magazine called Model Retailer that was a business to business kind of a magazine for hobby shops. So we would get models from Carrera and Scale Electrics, are the two big slot car companies, to review for Model Retailer. And so that helped to get people into it because, hey, if you review the car, you can have it. Oh, great. All right. Yeah, I'll review that one. So
right.
That built a lot of people's collections early on.
So were you first aware of Model Railroader when you were like 9, 10, 11 years old kind of thing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I used to go, there were two things I would get out of my elementary school library. There was this ancient book about space exploration that, told us that we'd all be driving flying cars by 2000 and commuting back and forth to the moon by then. And there was Model Railroader magazine. So when I had read the current issue of Model Railroader, I go back and get the book about space and how I was going to be able to work on the moon doing whatever it was that people would do on the moon in 2001.
Meet George Jetson. His boy Elroy.
And then you say you went to school for journalism?
Eventually, yeah. I took a rather long, circuitous trip through the collegiate part of my life. I started off, like I said, I was really into cars. I told a guidance counselor I wanted to be a car designer, and she said, well, that means you need to be an engineer. And I said, no, I want to design what cars look like, not how they work. And she said, no, I'm pretty sure you need to be an engineer. I had an art teacher who said, no, you want to take art classes and learn how to draw stuff. And I thought, well, you can't make money being an artist. Everyone knows that. So I took engineering classes classes in high school to head me toward engineering. And it only took me about a semester at Penn State to realize that I didn't really care about the area under the curve that much. And I didn't want to spend the rest of my life trying to find out what it was. So I dropped out of that. Found out that what I really wanted to be was an industrial designer, but that I needed to have a portfolio of to show my artistic talent, which I didn't have. So somebody suggested, you should try architecture. That's almost industrial design. I went to a school for architecture for a while. They said to me, you can do this, but you don't seem to love architecture. You need to love architecture. And I said, well, I like architecture, but I don't love architecture. They said, well, that's nice. See if you can drum up a little love and you can come back. Otherwise, it's been nice knowing you. At that point, I was working as a draftsman, drawing plans and such for a local architect in Pennsylvania. And I worked for him for a while and went through there and a couple of developers and whatnot, making a not bad living for a 20-something. And then a recession hit about 1990, and I figured out that I wasn't going to be able to find a job doing drafting. So I figured I may as well be a college student, because if I'm going to be broke anyway, I should probably be in college. And I applied to Temple University to their architecture program, thinking that they would allow me to transfer. And they said, no, you can't transfer into the architecture program. You have to start over. And I thought, well, I don't want to start over, and I'll take some other classes. And I took an intro to mass media class, and this is like I said, about 1990, 91 or so. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. This looks like a great career. I'm going to become a journalist, and I'll work in a newspaper, and that'll probably set me up for the rest of my life. I wasn't really paying attention to this internet thing that people had started to talk about. I did notice some of my classmates were excited to find that there are various things you could find on the internet in the computers in the classroom that our teachers would prefer that we weren't looking at. But
oh, really?
Yeah. He said, "Hey, look at this girl." Like, oh, yeah, that's Oliver, isn't it? Yeah, okay. I mean,
So how old were you at this point?
Oh, geez, I was in my mid-late 20s.
Okay.
But I finally graduated and ended up with a journalism degree.
And just to keep the continuity through this through this 20s stage up to your mid 20s, and when you graduated with the degree, were you still somehow involved in model railroading?
Well, I'd always had a train layout in my parents' basement. I have a younger brother. He's developmentally disabled, so we had this layout that it was technically his, but I was the one who was supposed to make sure that it worked.
Right.
So I tried to make it interesting to myself, but being in my parents' basement, it wasn't something I had access to all the time, and there was just a big
restrictions because it wasn't in your house and things like that.
Right. So I kept into it. Every so often, I'd get a card from Model Railroader giving me a deal on a subscription. So I'd get the subscription, and then they'd want me to renew for the full price, and I'd let it go. And then they'd send me another card for a subscription to Trains magazine for a great deal. So I'd get that for a while. And So I kept reading the magazine and various magazines from Kalmbach all through that time, and would go to the hobby shop and pick up a railroad model Craftsman from time to time if I saw something interesting. Stuff like that. I was keeping my foot
Right.
in the game, or my toes in the water, or something like that.
So the desire or the interest in model railroading and trains never really left. It was just that's what I find with most people. It's like once you get it, that's a question I'm going to ask you a little later. But once the bug hits you, it's not anything. Like every time I try to get out, they drag me back in.
Yeah.
which absolutely fascinates me about this hobby. It's the one thing about this podcast that I think I've created in my own mind. It's my mandate that before I die, I want to find out what it is about the fascination of trains and model railroading that pushes this hobby forward. Because the people that are in it, the people that like it, they're in it. They are in it all the way. They never seem, hardly anybody ever leaves the hobby. Sure, lots of people, they step away from model building, or they move, or they tear down a layout, or whatever it is. But the absolute desire to be a model railroader and be interested in trains never seems to leave anybody. And I'm fascinated by that, absolutely fascinated by that. So, I mean, it's cool that you're the editor of Model Railroader now, because I got a million questions. I'll probably take this as a plus or a minus, but this probably won't be your last time on the podcast.
All right. Well, I could do this again. That's not a problem.
Watch out. I'm telling you, Eric.
Yeah. Well,
you're going to get random text messages late after midnight.
No. You're not. He's not Dave. You are one of a. You're unique.
Well, with all the baggage that comes with.
Yeah, exactly. Basically what happens on Dave's Fireside Chats is I turn on the hit the record button, ask him a question, and an hour and a half later, I got myself a show.
Uh-huh.
We basically, Uncle Dave's Fireside Chat primarily is about the journey of life of Dave. That's pretty much, because there's always something going on. There's never a day off. But
Dave's a very good storyteller, so he's a good one to have on these kind of things.
Yeah, let's try not to encourage him too much.
Just a little bit. You want him to say, "Yeah, I'll come back."
Poor Eric is I think probably well acquainted with the fact that I can be pretty annoying when it comes to the internet. Eric, what about this? What about that? I've been very, very fortunate. And this is something that Tony Custer had pointed out, is that I was immediately assigned to work with Eric from that first article. And Eric has been very patient and persistent with me as I'm learning some of the ropes. I mean, I didn't know the big E thing until tonight. This is the first time I've ever heard that. So I've got a lot to learn still. And you've been a real great teacher so far. And I appreciate your patience.
Well, thanks. I appreciate your persistence. Some people say, this is like work. I'm not going to do this anymore. No.
See, what you don't realize, Dave and Eric, is long before you guys ever got in the door at Kalmbach, long before, there was this guy that was just like so enthusiastic. The only way they could keep this guy from bothering them constantly was to give him something to do. And he's legend around there.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, where were we at? Yeah. So, okay. So through your 20s, then you graduate with a journalism degree and you end up working for a newspaper eventually in Philly.
Right. Yeah. In the suburbs.
So that's where you're from originally, is basically that area, or?
Yep.
Okay.
Grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania.
All right. So, and you did that for a few years, and then was it like 2 or 3 different newspapers? Every time you'd see a better job, you kind of kept working your way up the ladder?
Well, I did a little bit of that. I started off at a weekly newspaper. My initial thought was to be a photojournalist. So I found this weekly newspaper was looking for a stringer, a correspondent, part-time, cover local stories. And I thought, well, I'll get in there and I'll take some pictures. And their photographer is probably some 80-year-old guy. And when he quits, then I'll get his job, and then I'll learn how to do this better, and I'll go on. Eventually, I'll work for the New York Times as a photographer or something like that, or National Geographic. So I get to this paper and I start doing my stories, and I realize the photographer is about a year older than me, and he's really, really good. So that plan didn't work. And going and covering school board meetings and town councils, I think there's probably 3 good stories I have out of the 5 years or so I did that, but it can get pretty dull. But I got a chance to start doing some editing and page layout, and that reminded me a bit of some of the architecture stuff I did, and that was fun, and working with a lot of different people that way. I enjoy doing that, so that's how I got into the copy editing first. And so when I went from the weekly paper to a daily paper, I was as a copy editor, and that's a fun kind of a job for similar people to model railroaders. People who have lots of different interests, tend to have strong opinions about things, aren't shy about sharing those opinions. So it was a fun environment to work in a newspaper on a copy desk in an editing situation. So I would be the guy that, there would be some story about trains and they'd say, Eric, is this right? And like, no, that's not right. It should be this and it should be that. Okay.
So how would these people know of your interest in trains? Was it just that you, again, that constant, it never leaves, you were all, somehow it came out that it was obvious to people you were interested in trains? I mean, I think that's what happens to a lot of us, is it's just the mere fact that who we associate with, you're always doing some train thing,
Yeah, and I mean, I wasn't, at that point, I was pretty much a lone wolf kind of a guy as far as a model railroader was concerned. But, when you're working from 5 to 2 in the morning and going between high adrenaline, got to get this story done and edited and on the page before deadline, and then you go to the next deadline isn't for another 2 hours, and you've got nothing to do for 2 hours. So you spend your time watching whatever game is on the newsroom TV and making fun of each other and trying to decide what to have for dinner or lunch or, tomorrow's dinner, and just talking about, what do you do when you're not
life in general. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, you tend to know a lot about the people that you work with, and because we're dealing with so many different kinds of things, you figure out who knows what about what. And, talk to that guy about music because he's got 500 record albums in his basement. And so you figure out who the experts are.
Okay. So jump forward. How do we get to model railroader?
Well, like I said, when you're working on a newspaper, you have all these deadlines all night long, and then you have lulls where there's nothing going on. And so sometimes in those lulls, I would go on to the Model Railroader forum page. And one time I went on there and there was an ad for, hey, do you want to be an editor for Model Railroader? And so I thought, that might be better than what I'm doing now. I was working for a family-owned newspaper, but they had just hired a guy whose reputation was for selling family-owned newspapers to large chains. When that happens, one of the first things that tends to disappear is the copy desk. I just had a son at the time, and I thought maybe I should look around for greener pastures. So I sent a resume out to Wisconsin here, and eventually got a call back and did a phone interview and came out for an in-person interview. And in January of 2014, they offered me a job, and I said, "Yeah, okay, you're going to pay me a little bit more than I got paid at the newspaper, but it costs a lot less to live in Wisconsin than it does in suburban Philadelphia. So that actually works out to be a pretty good raise. Yeah, all right, I'll do that."
Plus a never-ending supply of cheese.
There's all the cheese you want. And then I also learned that they strongly encourage you to have a model railroad, and they will do a lot to help you get one. So it's like, oh, really? Okay. Yeah,
so could I ask you how old of a gentleman you were at that time?
I was 50 when I moved out of southeastern Pennsylvania. So I had another buddy who I'd known since my college days who worked for Lockheed. and they had closed down their southeastern Pennsylvania shop and told him he could either move to Colorado or work for somebody else. And so we were both sort of talking about what's it like to move when you're 50 and you've lived, more than half your life probably in one place. So he, being a mathematician, did a whole bunch of analytics and gave me some information about Wisconsin. It made me realize that it would be a lot less expensive to live here. So, I would always joke with people that I used to know why streets had their weird names in Pennsylvania. I have no idea why streets have their weird names in Wisconsin.
That's an even stranger place when the two intersection, road AA intersects with road HH.
That was very strange, all the letters. But then I was used to taking roads like Sheep Hollow Road and Cold Spring Creamery Road and Cowpath Road, and they suddenly change into Old New Road or something like that. So having weird letter designations.
Right, yeah. And plus all the cheese you could possibly eat.
All the cheese you could eat, yes.
So during your 30s and 40s, were you building a layout? Did you have a layout? Were you heavily involved? Did you belong to a club? Where were you in model railroading during that time?
Well, it kind of varied. For a while, I just did a little bit of my own stuff. I had that the layout that was in my parents' basement got moved to a condo that my brother shared with a guy in the garage for a while. I helped set that up with him there. Eventually, that succumbed to lack of interest and got dumpstered. But I still had old models. Like everybody, I had projects that I had started at one point and hadn't finished, and so I would pull them out every so often. I managed to just about finish a nicely detailed model of an old Atlas Roco SD35 about the time they announced their brand new high-tech SD35 models.
That's consistent for across all modelers, I think.
Yes. And now I need Pennsylvania Railroad E44, so I figure if I start scratch building one, somebody will announce one about the time I finish the first model. So,
oh, you know what I forgot to do, Dave?
No,
I forgot to mention our sponsor.
Oh, well, there's a candidate for an E44.
There you go. That's what made me think of it. I was thinking of you and your, what is it? Your what 30 somethings you want?
Oh, my C30-7As.
Yeah. And
man.
You're always telling me to get a hold of Jason at Rapido and bug him about it.
I just figure another voice. Jason's heard from me numerous times on this, and I know, Eric, you can never imagine that. But
no.
But I figure the more voices, the better. And now with the C30-7, that was actually something that I talked to Jason about announcing well before it was announced. And there was some discussion back and forth. And, I don't know, is there really a market for it? I said, Jason, the way you guys do locomotives, it's top shelf stuff. And the last time anybody took a serious look at a C30-7 was Atlas, and then I guess Bachmann. Was it Bachmann that came out with theirs? Not Spectrum. Or no, I'm sorry, Bachmann, Broadway Limited. But both of those were really 90s tooling with old electronics at best. A Rapido model is a cut above all of that stuff. And
sure,
they're beautiful. And boy, I'm gonna need to get like a second mortgage if anybody comes out with the C37A. Like I did the one that Eric was kind enough to help me with and get into Model Railroader, which has been a lot of fun. And it's a lot of work. I would love if somebody came out like the sponsor of this AML podcast. Rapido Trains.
So a little history for you, Eric. So the podcast has been going for about 8 years. Well, more than 8 years now. And I kind of we have on Mondays, which is today is December 19th, Monday, December 19th. On Mondays is a free podcast. And then we have patrons who help continue to push the brand forward. And on Tuesdays, for those people who sign up for the Patreon channel, there's another podcast. So I've been having Dave, every time he kind of goes, every time it's obvious that he's never listened, I'm thinking to myself, I wish he'd quit doing that.
Well, I have a feeling Eric will listen to a few of these. You know,
Yeah, but no.
as time goes on here.
But you know what? Podcasts aren't for everybody. That's the beauty of it. That's why it's so cool, is because it's like what you said, is with the printed material, that works great. But podcasts are just another aspect of journalism or media that has now been made available to people. And podcasts aren't for everybody, just like having a magazine prescription or subscription isn't for everybody. And so anyways, Eric, so we went along for like 8 years, and one day, and I'd had a few manufacturers contact me about having a sponsor, and I really didn't know what to do, because it was like, I don't know anything about, not only do I not know anything about podcasting, I certainly didn't know anything about having a sponsor. And Jason Tron and I were out to lunch one day, the president of Rapido Trains in Markham, Ontario. Yes. And we got talking about it, and I was kind of looking for his advice. And he says, after the end of lunch, we had hammered out a deal where now Rapido Trains is the sole sponsor of the AML Network's free channel, which is very, very cool, because it's very easy to have one sponsor. You don't have to think about which sponsor is sponsoring which show. And of course, Rapido Trains being a front runner or one of the standards of excellence in the hobby, I think it gives I should be paying Jason, because it gives the podcast credibility that Jason would and Rapido Trains would think that Modeler's Life was worthy of their sponsorship.
Well, anything that Jason touches on is always going to be high quality. So if he's given you his imprimatur, then you must be high quality as well. Yeah,
we also have a rule here, Eric. We try not to use words with more than 2 syllables. So I have no idea what imprimatur is.
If he gave you a hearty slap on the back, then you know you're doing good.
Oh, okay.
Well, and it's a routine advertisement in Model Railroader as well, on the rear cover or inside the front cover. Rapido's really pushing the envelope, I think. And there's some world-class Canadian models, but there are some world-class American models as well now. And the Onondaga Cutoff has been a huge beneficiary of the B36-7 that Jason's crew did. Several different freight cars. They're coming out. You guys have watched trains, and the 50-foot flat cars from the 90s that were, I think they were rebuilt box cars, but they have the graded deck where it's almost just like a open grating on the deck. And Rapido's doing that model, and they're doing a bunch of transition era wooden box cars and USRA box cars and open top hoppers. And it's just that the line is growing. And even despite all of the challenges of a growing company, I think Rapido's mission still is very constant. And it's really starting to help the hobby, I think, in a lot of different eras, a lot of different ways. And it's an exciting time. It's a big reason why I think the hobby is doing as well as it is.
Yeah, that's true. And it's rapidotrains.com. And there may or may not now be a jingle. And if you didn't hear the jingle, then there isn't one yet. But Jeremy's working on it. Anyways, we're very excited. The Rapido Trains is the sole exclusive sponsor of all things AML, Modeler's Life. So we're very excited about that. And I may mention them again before the end of your interview, Eric.
Okay.
But see, the problem is, because I'm new at this whole having a sponsor thing, I forgot to talk about it at the start, which is it's what you should do. Because obviously, because the studio is painted blue and yellow, it's obvious that we're in the Rapido studios, the Rapido Train studios, which I got to get. See, the problem is, after 8 years, I'm still not very good at this.
You got to find a way to get some blue and yellow mold on the shrimp too.
Yeah, there you go.
We got to move on from green, the green right? Shrimp. No more green.
Yeah, no more green. They got to be blue mold. Yeah, there you go. Oh, we'll get a lot more cheese. All right. So, anyways, you get so through your 30s and 40s, still you had that passion for model railroading and for trains, which just absolutely fascinates me. I just find that endlessly fascinating, that once people are interested in the hobby and in trains, it just never seems to leave. It just hooks people. What do you think that is? Any idea?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different things about, if you think about trains, like the full-size things that we build models of, they're big machines, and so it's cool to see something that large moving under its own power. They connect different parts of the country. So if you think about that for a little bit, either the freight trains where you've got boxcars going across the country, or containers that could have come from anywhere in the world, they're now passing 50 feet in front of you. And then of course there's all the passenger traffic. It's a place to get to someplace else. You go to old railroad stations in big cities, and they're grand places, and it makes train travel an event. It's not like the way we deal with airports, where it's this cramped space and everybody's miserable and has just been poked and prodded, and now you're going to get shoved into a tin can and shot across the sky. You have this calm, gentle experience. Part of that's because rail travel is not the way it used to be, but it's got a lot of romanticism to it. So it's something you can sit back and contemplate and enjoy just the idea of it. And I don't know about you guys, but I think miniature versions of really huge things like trains and ships and spacecraft are really cool to have. I'd love to have a GG1 in my basement, but I can't fit one. It's not that big of a basement. So, I know Jason has a railroad car in his basement.
Yeah.
But, they don't pay that much at Combox, so I'm not going to be able to get a railroad car in my basement. I might be able to get a part of a 40-foot boxcar down there, but my basement's not that tall either. So,
how wide?
I think it grows too. The hobby can grow with you, which is a neat part of it. And it's not just the operations part, which we've all talked about before, but when you look at the whole RPM idea, that the railway prototype modelers meets, you look at national shows, you look at local train shows, there's all sorts of stuff to choose from, but then you can bring it home and you can learn if it's the right, pattern to the doors, or if that kind of locomotive ever had that paint job on it. And then there's the history of that, and why there is a Conrail, and what happened to Rio Grande, why is there no more Rio Grande anymore, and so on and so forth. And the hobby is there to be, you can take it as far as you want to go. And sure. I think now with the internet, there's always a way to get in touch with people that enjoy the niche that you enjoy. And that kind of thing, it fosters growth. It's exciting.
I know, but still though, both great points, but I don't know. There's something about the fascination people have with model railroading and trains that I just can't put my finger on. It's something very, very cool. It's something, and as you and I have talked a lot about, Dave, and Eric, I'm interested in your opinion. As you said, Dave, it becomes a way of life. It's like,
it's definitely a lifestyle, and that's the case for railroaders like myself. If you're in the profession of moving actual trains, or maintaining the right of way, or dispatching, or administering the account, over time, railroads have tried to hold on to people. The whole system of retirement is set up that you stick around. There's big benefits for sticking around. That institutional knowledge is very, very important. I was just talking to Rich Wisniewski. Eric, you met him here at the Onondaga Cutoff, and he works with me on NJ Transit. I was just talking with him about this today, that one of our challenges is finding ways in a changing job market to hold on to people, to build that institutional knowledge. But it really is a way of life. It's becomes your community. The history of it is very important. It affects the way we do things today. And that team building, and it's just like the slot cars we were talking about at Kalmbach, Eric, that team building becomes part of why it's a successful business. Because you can trust your coworkers, and there's more there than just, we got to go back to the grind for a couple hours today. There's a friendship and a camaraderie to it that I think drives everybody to do a little bit better. And it's a big part of railroading. It's a big part of the hobby as well. And I think that's one of the things that draws people back, is that sense of camaraderie, that sense of belonging.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Dave. It's not whether you're an operator or a modeler. It's sharing the ideas with other people, either to show them what you're doing and get some feedback. And, of course, the best part is when someone says, wow, that's really cool. But it's also nice when someone says, I see what you're trying to do there, and how did you do that? And did you think about trying doing it this way? It might work for you better. And you try that way and you go, wow, yeah, I can make something I like even better than the last thing I made. And, it's a constant growth kind of a thing where you're learning stuff. There's just always something more to do, more people to meet, more places to go, more models to build. There's if there's any part of it that suddenly isn't as interesting, then there's probably another aspect of it you can pick up for a while that's still going to keep your interest.
Yeah, like you say, more models to build, more people to meet. There's always more people to meet, which I think is John Doring, who's director of, I think, the Eastern. Sorry, John, I can't remember that stuff. But anyways, John Doring made a great point. We were having a discussion with Gordy Robinson, the president of the NMRA, and John Doring, who's director, and he said it's like you get to the gate and you think the hobby is about trains and model railroading, but once you get inside the castle, what you realize is it's about the group and the people and the camaraderie and everything that goes with it. Just makes the hobby kind of come to life on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
So you've made it to Kalmbach now. You've been there 9 years. Once you got to Kalmbach, and probably almost felt like your dream job, I guess, being an associate editor there.
Well, sure. I mean, especially when I first started, I came from a newspaper environment, so I was used to doing my editing really quickly. I got my first story, and I, had it all turned around in an hour or so, and went over to Neil's office and said, "Okay, now what do I do?" And he said, "Well, go back and look at that story some more. You don't have to have it done by 6 tonight. You have till 2 weeks from Thursday." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So because of that, I got to do a lot of modeling when I first started. We did a project railroad called the Eagle Mountain. Was the Eagle Mountain Mine that was based on a mine in California near the Joshua Tree National Monument. What was the name? Yeah, Eagle Mountain Mine was the name of the mine, but there was another. I can't think of the name of the railroad. It just ran to this mine and then down to Southern Pacific, and I was sort of given the project to deal with. So you make it happen. I had some help from Cody Grivno. He did the ballasting as he does for every project just about. He painted some freight cars and locomotives and a caboose, but I got to build a bunch of models and build a bunch of scenery, and that was basically my job for a while. I'd have to stop and get photos taken of it, or have the folks from the video crew come in and shoot video of me doing different stuff. But I was basically a professional modeler for about 6 months, and that was a great experience. And somewhere in that point, started there's a Friday lunch thing that they've been doing since they were in downtown Milwaukee. So the people who would go to that were Jim Kelly, Andy Sprandio, our editor Neil at the time, and then a couple of guys from the sort of Friends of Kalmbach kind of people. So I got to meet Andy Sprandio and hear him talking with a guy named Gordy Spearing, who's a longtime friend of Andy's, about operations. And I always sort of wondered, I'd never done that. Like I said, I'd sort of been a lone wolf kind of guy. And so I said, hey, I'm kind of interested in doing some operations. I'd like to go and do that. So Andy said, yeah, we're doing some stuff, and I'll tell you when we're going to a layout that I think you'd be interested in, and you can come along. So my first operating experience was going to an O-scale layout outside Chicago with Andy Sprandio, where he was the yard master and I was the guy running the train. And that was a great introduction to that aspect of the hobby, and just starting to get to know people that way as well. And
must have felt like you died and gone to heaven almost with all as far as that aspect of your life.
Well, it was sort of like, yeah, how am I doing this? It was things that I would read about in the magazine, and now I'm sitting next to this guy running a yard, and he's telling me, yeah, this is what you do now, and
and model building for a living, and scenery for a living, and
right, yeah. And when I had a question about what's a good way to do this, I would go ask Cody Grivno or go ask David Pop or all these guys who have been reading their articles in the magazine for 15, 20 years, and they're just the guy down the hall, and okay, this is how you do that, and if you want to try this, do this, and oh, you need an airbrush, tell Neil, he'll order one for you. Oh, okay. Yeah, great. So that was just it was a kid in a candy store kind of experience. So
you must have had a permanent smile stenciled to your face.
Pretty much, yeah. Except that it was really cold. You may have heard it gets cold in Wisconsin.
I have heard that.
That first year, we got out here Super Bowl Sunday. I think it was the Denver Broncos playing somebody. I forget who it was now. And I think the high was below zero that day, and the high didn't get above zero for about 2 weeks. And it didn't get above freezing, of course, until like April. And growing up in Southeast Pennsylvania, I'm used to the flowers start to pop up in mid-March, and so that was a bit of a shock. And then nobody told me that they have tornadoes in Wisconsin. That was not one of the things that was on the things you might want to know about this place. We would like you to move. So it's like, what's that sound? Why am I hearing a siren go? Oh, that's the tornado. They're just testing the tornado sirens. Oh, okay. Does that happen a lot around here? Well, no, it's been 15 or 20 years since a tornado touched down. Oh, okay. Well, I guess that's good.
Yeah, that'll open your eyes.
But then, as Dave is aware, on the East Coast, you get tropical storms and hurricanes, and they can be pretty messy too. So,
so what was so then somehow the time goes along. You're obviously glad you're at Model Railroad. You're obviously glad you're at Kalmbach. It's been 9 years now. You're going to probably be a lifer. So at some point, then an opening for the editor of Model Railroader comes available. Now, was that were there several candidates? Were they looking outside the magazine? Were you the only? Did you happen? Everybody said, take a step. They said take a step forward, and everybody took a step back. What was that kind of And I don't expect you to tell us anything that you don't want to, but I'm interested in the process.
Well, I started as an associate editor. That's sort of the entry level editor job at any of the Kalmbach magazines, and so I did that for 6 years. And in 2020, the senior editor at the magazine, Dana Koala, left to go work for Walthers. So when he went to go do that, they asked if I would be interested to be senior editor. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. When Neil hired me, he did that sort of, where do you see yourself in the future of the company? What do you, when you're done working here, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want your job. And he's like, oh, okay. And I knew that Neil wasn't that much older than me. I didn't think it was very likely that I would get his job, but as things happened, he left the company and retired early, and Hal Miller took over, and then Carl Swanson took over for Hal, and Jim Rinn passed away. Hal Miller had moved on to Classic Toy Trains. Carl moved over to Trains Magazine, and there was an opening. And I think, having done the experiences that I'd had, having been interested in going out to do operating sessions and being comfortable going outside the building and talking to people as a model railroader, they sort of said, yeah, I think this is the guy we want to be the editor. So
very cool. Must have been a very exciting day. Exciting for you to tell your wife and everything. Eh?
It was. Yeah. We work from home 2 days a week. So it was a Monday, and David Pop calls me up and says, were you planning to come in today? And I said, well, no, it's Monday. I usually don't come in Mondays. well, I need to talk to you about something, and it'd be better if you came in. And I was like, okay. He's like, don't worry, it's nothing bad. It's like, all right. It's like, can you come in? It's like, yeah, I can come in. So I was hoping it would be good news, and man, it turned out to be good news.
Okay. And now, during that, when you're hammering out the salary and conditions and all that, I had heard a rumor. It's only a rumor. It's only hearsay. I have no way of backing this up. I believe it, but I have no way of confirming this. Is it true that at that point you said, "Can somebody else deal with Dave?"
Well, that was part of the deal, is that you got Dave and you can't pass him off on anybody.
That's good. Although I can't imagine that for the book I'm going to be working directly with you. I mean, you've got enough on your plate now. I think that I'm sure at some point there'll be somebody else for the next book. But it's been a real pleasure working with you on everything so far. I've certainly appreciated it. Well,
yeah, and same here, Dave. Like I said, you've been a great guy to work with, and I'm glad we've been able to do a bunch of projects together. And the reality is, yeah, I'm supposed to think deep thoughts and use big words like imprimatur and stuff like that. And so they want me to talk to Dave and say, hey, we want you to do a story about this, and convince him that this is actually his idea and he really wants to do it. So we'll get somebody else to actually edit the story once it comes in. But we've got some new guys. We have a new associate editor, Bryson Sleppy. He just joined us in the summer. He's doing great right out of college. Came to us from Walthers. He moved out to the Milwaukee area to try and get himself a job in the model railroading field. So we were real lucky to have him want to come work for us. And I'll probably have you work with Bryson, Dave, and I think you'll like him.
That's exciting. Excellent.
So in other words, the new guy drew the short straw.
Well, you got to break him in somehow, I guess. That's fine.
Why don't you have Bryson give me a little dingle on the blower first, and then maybe I can.
Actually, how about we don't do that?
Okay, so that's cool. I think we got a pretty good background now. So, Eric, one of the reasons we are talking to you today on December the 19th is because every year since the start of this podcast, at Christmas time, I do a show called The State of the Hobby. Kind of like the State of the Union, only it's the State of the Hobby, where I find some unsuspecting magazine editor and grill him on what the hobby's like, where it's going, what's happening. And so this is where we get into the hardball questions.
Okay.
So you're a perfect candidate for this. I hope I don't offend you. Don't be surprised if I do, because it's kind of the thing I do. But I don't like to, what's the best way to describe this, Dave? It's not hardball questions, but I don't want to pretend that the internet doesn't exist. So I'm interested on your aspect as a new editor of a print magazine. Where do you see the future for print magazines and print media in model railroading going forward? That's my first question.
Well, it's no secret that people have been moving away from print magazines, and we've realized for a long time that our biggest competitor is the internet. And so, obviously we've got to react to that and respond to it. And that's why we now have made this big push for trains.com. And we're doing a lot of digital stuff that we didn't used to do when I first started 9 years ago. We recognize that our biggest and best customer base is still the magazine, and it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. But we know that probably eventually people are going to want to have different ways of getting information. I hope that the magazine's going to be around for the rest of my time here. It's not really in my hands to make that decision. There are folks, several pay grades above me that will make those kinds of choices. And I can see various ways. Maybe the magazine sort of becomes a boutique kind of a thing where you've got to pay a lot of money to get it because it becomes more expensive to print magazines as time goes by. And so if you want something on paper, then it's going to cost you a little bit more money. We'll be happy to sell you information over the internet where we don't have to buy paper to print it on. But if you want us to do that for you, then we're going to charge you a premium. That's not where we are now. We're still doing what we've been doing for 89 years now. 2024 will be the 90th anniversary. And I'm looking forward to being the editor of Model Railroader at its 100th anniversary. That's my goal, is to get it to that stage at least.
Right. Okay.
Excellent. That's exciting. Yeah. And I definitely think that there's a niche that it fills. I think there really is. And, again, this is even as somebody who's, the ripe old age of 45, but I love holding these magazines in my hands. I really do feel a kinship there. We're reading it in print. It's different than reading it on a screen or printing it out yourself. It's just, there's no question in my mind that I prefer to see it in print. And I know that there's a lot of people that are starting to do more online, and the cost point, I think, that's an important point without a doubt. We've already seen that shift in some of the smaller circulation magazines, like some of the historical societies that are done, the technical societies and what have you. But it's nice to see Model Railroader staying committed to some of the print side of things too.
Sure. And I mean, model railroading is a hands-on hobby. So I think having a hands-on form of media for the hobby makes sense. It's probably one of the better audiences to try to do that with. I can't imagine there are too many print magazines about the internet these days. That would seem sort of silly.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, that's a good point, though. So do you see, it is a hands-on thing, and it's a hands-on hobby. So, you can see, do you think you'll have more articles about, I don't know, just for argument's sake, how to lay track or how to install a switch or how to wire? Like, do you think you'll go more towards more hands-on type articles? Or, like, I know that, like, for me, Eric, what was your favorite issue all time of Model Railroader?
We had to answer that question back in 2017 when we published our 1000th issue. So
right.
I picked...
Just be really careful with your answer.
I picked actually one from the mid-70s. There was a traction modeler named Bob Heggie.
Yes, I remember that.
And there was a cover where there were two red... I think they were interurbans.
I remember that one. Yeah, I remember that one.
And I remember looking over those pictures. I must have, worn that magazine to shreds, staring at those photos and just thinking, how did you do that? This is such cool modeling, and this looks like you could walk into these scenes and run these interurbans, and you better not touch the third rail because you probably will. You probably will get yourself electrocuted.
Boom.
So, I think that's one that really stuck with me.
I actually remember that one. That was a very, like you say, the cover was very dramatic.
Yeah, yeah.
But now the correct answer for that question is actually the February 1994 issue would be your favorite.
It would. I'm wondering, was there a young author who had gotten a first article maybe published that issue?
Possibly.
Yeah. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I would if I was you. Okay, so all right, so Model Railroader and Kalmbach are obviously well aware of the internet and things like that. But I'm interested too in your overview of, like, me personally, I think this hobby is going to explode, and we're all going to be covered in Model Railroad goo. Because the one thing I've discovered from doing this podcast is this hobby is like way bigger than I ever imagined. And I had done the whole Model Railroader thing. I had a column, and I got to stand in the Model Railroader booth at train shows, and
sure.
I thought I had, had made it. And then, and once I started doing this podcast, like, this hobby is huge. And have you had that sense since you over the 9 years of working at the Kalmbach?
There is a huge community, and I think, like you were talking earlier about the kinds of products that Jason Schron's putting out at Rapido, the stuff that's out there now that you can buy that you don't even have to spend the hours that Bob Hagee must have spent building his interurbans, as well as, I mean, the internet might be trying to kill my job, but at the same time, it makes my hobby a lot easier. I can learn about things that I just couldn't have known about when I was a kid, and find people making detail parts that I never would have imagined. It's just amazing how much you can get, how accurately you can model things if you want to, and how much easier it is to do that than it used to be. From just the 3D printing and CAD drafting that you can do fairly easily on just about any computer anybody's likely to have. There's just so much more available to you now than I think there was when I was a kid. I look at old issues of MR, and there's a bunch of ads for brass shapes and milled wood, and that's what you got. You had to make everything that you wanted. You couldn't just go buy it.
Yeah.
So
I think I have a really good question, Dave. I think I have a really good question.
Okay.
Are you excited?
Always.
All right.
You know me.
Yeah. So this is the first time Eric and I have ever talked. Like I say, I've heard all about him from you many a time. And Eric and I, this is our first real conversation. We didn't meet in the parking lot. There's nothing up my sleeve. This is our first real communication together. I get the sense, Eric, I'm very pleased to say that I get the sense that you're very glad that you're there. And I'm wondering, are you looking forward? It sounds to me like you're looking forward to the challenge of making Model Railroader, the magazine, stay as vibrant as possible while you try to realize how to integrate it with something that you can't avoid, which is the internet. Like, would that be a fair statement?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, Model Railroader has been a part of my life, like I said, since I was a kid. So I wanted to go on. I've got a 10-year-old son. I want him to be able to look at it and say, yeah, here's the issues that my dad worked on when I was a kid, and show them to his kids and so forth. I want this to be a thing that never goes away, that is that important to the hobby and to hobbyists that they always want to have access to Model Railroader and everything that we can help bring them. And I just think it's an important part of what we do is to sort of keep the hobby going and help connect people to one another and, build skills and share great models. And like I said, I think it's great to have a physical object that you can look at. When the power goes out, and you can still look at your Model Railroader magazine by the light of your dying cell phone.
It's almost like, but when I think of it, like Eric's had the same experience with that Bob Hagee issue that I had with the John Allen issue that had the center spread, the fold out center spread. And I mean, I can remember laying on the floor in the living room of my parents' house, just going through that magazine page by page by page a couple of hundred times. Like I just wore the thing out. And, I've read every magazine there, every Model Railroader there was since, since time began, because it was, and it's, I was the same as Rod Stewart. I was more excited about being on the cover of Model Railroader than pretty much anything else. I mean, that first time was like, holy mackerel, I made it. It's a lifelong ambition for that. It's just so I mean, I guess what the key is, how do you integrate it now? Because I think the hobby's growing like crazy. Me personally, I think it's growing like crazy. I think now the thing that's different from 40 years ago is that younger people of all ages, and I would say younger by under the age of 35, now have a way to, from the age of 10 to 30, now have this way to connect with people of the same age group, the same ilk, that are interested in trains. And I think that's just going to just push the hobby forward like crazy. Like just I really think it's going to grow like crazy. I really do. I can't see anything else for it because we're all connected now. Look at you and
Mhm.
I. Look at you and I. I'm having a chance to have an hour and a half long conversation with you and Dave. And, how cool. That never would have happened 10, 15 years ago.
No. And, it's, there's just so many more opportunities out there to see what people are doing and to get with people and, go to Lebanon, New Jersey and jump back in time to the mid 90s and race Conrail trains across the Onondaga Cutoff. Something you couldn't have done years ago.
So here's a question I have for you, and I want an absolute honest answer. Agree, disagree. Either way is just as good. First time I ever made it to Dave, and Dave and I had met on the internet talking, and we talked for a year and a half before we saw each other in person during there was this worldwide pandemic thing. I don't know if you heard about it or not.
Yeah, vaguely recall.
Right. And so the first time I ever went to the Onondaga Cutoff was I'd never seen his house. And I mean, he has this beautiful house, this older home that's him and his wife have made. It's a great place to be, a wonderful home. And you kind of go in, and the door to the basement is wooden, and you start going down this basement. You got to kind of work your way down this. It reminded me of the Keebler Elf cookie tree. I mean, when you think about
I've never been there, so I don't know.
Well, there you go. Fair enough. I've seen it on TV, but when you think of it, Dave's kind of got that elf kind of thing going. And then, this, you go down into this magical, and you kind of come around the corner and it's kind of like, and you're thinking, how do they get all those cookies in that tree? And you're thinking, how can this wonderful thing that you see in the magazine be inside this building? And yet there it is.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I've had the joy of going to different places and seeing some layouts and going, wow, yeah, okay. So this is what you can stuff into a basement if you're really dedicated to trying to do that. And I got to edit that story about how Dave did that for in the MRP issue, which is where I first became acquainted with him. So it was a bunch of emails, and then we met at a railroad operating weekend in the DC area, and it's just been fun to work with him since. And finally, this fall to actually see the layout in person and see how he actually did it and get to run on it. And it was almost like racing slot cars. You got to keep on your toes at Dave's basement. Fortunately, I didn't deslot or derail because we're not. It's not uncommon that a slot car will hit the floor. That probably wouldn't have been. Would not have caused the kind of laughter at Dave's that it does at David Pops when that happens.
I guess I never thought about that aspect of slot cars, but that is a key difference.
Yes,
that's true.
And they can also hurt when they hit you because they're going pretty fast.
Now, did you end up arguing with Dave after the session? Because I did.
No. Well, when we went, I had my wife and child with me, so
okay.
I was being dragged in a couple different directions. My son had to show me all the cool toys that he found that Dave's kids have.
Right.
So yeah, you've got a 10-year-old who's insistent on telling you what he found out about when he told me all along that he had to come on this trip because he wanted to run trains. But then, other things will take your attention from time to time.
He actually had a fun little operating session with my boys up on the Lionel layout upstairs.
Okay.
Oh, yes. I've not even heard about that yet. So.
Well, there you go. Exactly. All right. So what's the future of this hobby, Eric? Where do you see us going? Where do you see what's got you excited? What's got you thinking about? Where do you see us going over the next year?
Well, the next year, I think it's...
Or 10, whichever you prefer.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just going to be a lot of more. I think with that thing you were talking about the last couple of years, that pandemic thing, there's some pent up, what do I want to say, product tour type of stuff coming out. So we're just seeing a ton of new products coming out that have been sort of locked away in the logistic nightmare that we've all worked through the past couple of years. So so I think that's going to be the next year and a half, 2 years is just going to be a lot of new stuff. And as time goes by, I think we're going to see people developing new ideas because we can share them so much more quickly now. It's going to spread much more quickly. And like you said, the hobby is just going to keep evolving and growing. And I'm hoping there's no model railroad or goo anywhere, but I think there's going to be just more of everything.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think it's going to be more of everything. And at the same time, while, you talk about trying to keep the magazine going because print media is struggling in this day and age, it's almost like Model Railroader might also be positioned in the perfect spot where it can show how a magazine can continue on because the hobby will grow and Model Railroader could position itself put itself in a position where it's still the paper magazine, the place to go, the place to be, it's like, I think that the exciting part of the future is we have no idea what the future is for this hobby other than me personally. I don't even I'm basically have banned, that hobby is dying discussion off this podcast because me personally, I don't think we have any idea how much this hobby is going to grow over the next 10 years. I think in 10, 20 years, we won't even recognize it and it'll be so much more mainstream, so much more popular. I think it's just, there's only one direction to go with the hobby, and that's up.
Well, I think we're definitely seeing things like the cheapo train sets that kind of fall off. There's less of the cheapo end of the hobby. The true toy aspect of the smaller scales, the N scale and HO train sets, the old Bachmann and Lifelike train sets that we grew up with in the 70s and the 80s. But the flip side to that is that there's the high end is just exploding. I mean, when we were all kids, it was Overland brass. Maybe you could get another brass manufacturer, Samagosa or Sunset, but that was the high end of the hobby. And then it was the Stewart F units and the Kato drives that came out before that. That really, and then Atlas, of course, really up the game as well, again with the Kato motors. And that trend has continued. I mean, the number of high-end products that Eric alluded to earlier that you can buy ready to go super detailed models, that's opened up another whole part of the hobby, which is the custom weathering side of things.
Yeah.
And I think it's made operations better because you have time to do these things because everything else is put together. So it's just the best is still yet to come. I mean, if you think the hobby's dying, you're just not paying attention. That's a pre-existing opinion that really doesn't have much basis in fact.
Well, and that opinion goes back to the beginning of the hobby. I think if you look at the second issue of Model Railroader, there's probably a letter in there about how model railroading is dying.
You're probably right.
Yeah, because now it's in the media, and anything that goes in the media is automatically too big to survive. Yeah, I'm sure you're right. You're right.
So, I mean, I'm being facetious about the second issue, but there certainly are stories like that in the 50s where, that's the end of the hobby. Lynn Westcott, our much remembered editor, was vehemently against slot car racing because he thought that was going to kill the hobby. I was in David Pop's basement early on, and he was there, and Neil Basugalov, our MR editor, was there, and there were a couple of other guys from Kalmbach, and I said, if Lynn Westcott was still around, we'd all be fired right now because we're playing with slot cars, and he wouldn't have had anything to do with it. But we're still all model railroaders. There's room to do more stuff. You have some time to do that kind of thing, and like I said, you've got access to people who are interested in it, so you can learn what works and what doesn't. You don't spend as much time on the floor trying to push your lifelike GP18 through the carpet on brass track that's instantly weathered itself because it doesn't doesn't avoid oxidation.
Yeah.
I mean, just all these things that people had to deal with that made it a frustrating hobby 50 years ago. They're just not problems anymore.
That's a good point. That's an excellent point. All those things that people that people press through. That's why I continually go back to this. I am endlessly well, I'm fascinated about the fascination people have with trains. I mean, I know, like, if I was talking to George Sebastian Coleman, he'd said, "How can you use the word fascination twice in the same sentence?" Uh, but I'm, yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's this endless, search I have of trying to figure out what the fascination with this hobby and trains is, because it just doesn't go away. I mean, once you're in, like I say, once you get in, it just never leaves you. And I've been a car guy my whole life too. As a kid, I raced stock cars and, the whole 9 yards. But this hobby has always been there. It's never, no matter what I did to try to, even when I wrote for Model Railroad, and I was, here's something never to do, Dave. Never have a how-to column that appears in the magazine every month.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work.
It's funny. The current columnist, Jerry Diedzik, for on operations, he warned me about that. He's like, before you sign up, for anything monthly, remember that it's got to be pretty general, and no matter what you do, it is a ton of work, because a month goes by awfully quickly. And I had to pause and think about it, and it's excellent advice, Lionel. You get yourself in a pickle in a hurry.
Oh my God!
And that's all you end up doing.
Yeah,
because it's all you have time to do.
Yeah, yeah. And yet, when I got to the end of, I think the column ran for 7, 8, 9 years, I forget, but I got to the end, and it was like, I hardly did anything in the hobby for a couple of years, but. Then all of a sudden, you kind of wake up one day and you go, I didn't finish that Jeep 35 I was working on. I wonder where, and you dig it out, you start working on it again. And once it's in your blood, it just never leaves, which is a fascinating part of this hobby. And I think, Dave, you have summed it up perfectly with, like you said, it's a lifestyle. It's a way of life.
It's how many days go by, even when you're, doing something else, something entirely different, that it doesn't cross your mind. Like every time, and Eric made the point, you see a train and that rekindles the interest in real life, because these are miniatures of something that's large and fascinating and industrial and exciting, that does something important and noble. I mean, those are compelling signs one way or the other, but so are aircraft carriers, right? I mean, so are, military tanks but when was the last time you went to an operating session with an aircraft carrier? I mean, and even if you don't operate, the fact that you can is a really important point. I mean, there's no lid on the hobby. Whereas if you're building N scale or HO scale aircraft carriers, there's a lid. I mean, even if you get it to work and you're an Adam Pinellas or a Martin Jenkins, where, you put in the solenoid motors and you figure out a way to make this thing actually run and turn, having a whole operating session is difficult, because there's not too many people that have figured out how to do that. So model railroading really starts you out ahead of that curve. And it's a very exciting hobby to be part of. It really is.
Yeah, I saw today.
Absolutely.
I saw today that one of our AML regulars, been around for years, Roger Coleman, had a picture printed in Diesel Era magazine. And
oh, cool! I think I saw that too.
Yeah, and
good job, Roger. It's awesome.
Yeah, great job, Roger. But I mean, he's so excited because that's his first published piece, in a magazine, and it's like, it's so exciting to be published in a model railroading magazine, and it's like, I mean, being on the cover of Model Railroader is kind of like, okay, well, I can go now. I got a real tough question for you, Roger. We'll finish with this question, Roger. Can I call you Roger? Can I call you Steve?
You can, but I might ignore you.
Okay. That's probably a good way to go forward anyways.
That I wish I had a recording of that. Oh, that's right. I am going to have a recording of that.
Yeah, you do have a recording.
That was funny.
Have you ever listened to the podcast, Dave?
No.
No, I didn't.
Well, only half of that one episode about Phil Monat.
Yeah. That was the highlight of my career. We interviewed. Do you must know of Phil Monat, do you, Eric?
I have been with some operating sessions and
right.
Heard some of his stories. Sure.
We were about 5 minutes in, and he stated he hated podcasts. And I'm like, anyways, a question I am interested in as a former contributor to the magazine. How hard is it for you these days with so many different outlets for people to have their work produced and published? How hard is it for you now to get material for the magazine?
Well, we do get, I've got what do I have on my computer here now? I've been trying to whittle down my emails after being away for a week. I'm down to 99. Yeah. So a bunch of them here are stories that people have sent to the magazine unsolicited. Hey, I think this would be a cool story. We're still getting plenty of stories. We always want more. There are always gaps in what we have. So, any N scale modelers, if you want to write about anything N scale, send it in. There's a good chance I'll say, hey, yeah, I like that. As long as the pictures are decent, we'll be interested in talking to you. So it's not hard to find people, but we're always looking for new people, and we're looking for guys. Not everybody's going to be a Dave Ableys who sends me multiple stories and writes a couple of books. That's a lot of production from one person.
I think the key statement there is not everybody's going to be a Dave Ableys, and can we just thank God for that?
There is a God, and that's a sign. It's kind of like Benjamin Franklin, beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy.
Well, it's like my one of the very first times I met Russ Larson. I've met a lot of model railroader editors now. First time I met Russ Larson, it was at some sort of Kalmbach picnic, model railroader picnic thing. It was before I had my column, and we got into this discussion, and he says, I can find a guy that's got ideas. I can find a guy that can write. I can find a guy that can take photographs, and I can find a guy that get it done on time. But to find a guy that can do all four of those things, that's the challenge.
Yep.
And
well, the nice thing about Model Railroader is it's not a newspaper. If you tell me how you make pine trees, I can run that story next month or in 2 years, and it'll still be good. So
yeah, which is kind of like a podcast. This will be released on December 19th in the year 2029. No.
All right.
That's not true. Okay. So this is it. This is the final question. Your prediction on the state of the hobby is?
It's healthy. It's strong. It's going to keep on going for a while. We're all going to be able to enjoy all the trains that we want. There's going to be plenty of high-end models, but we also see a lot of companies making more accessible models. You've got companies like Scale Trains coming out with their Kit Classics line. You've got Walthers with their Trainman stuff. You've got Atlas with their stuff. I might be mixing up some names, so I apologize if any of those guys are listening. But I think that's important as well as the high-end stuff, that we've got good quality models that are value priced and are actual models of actual railroad equipment. And I think that's a great thing too. So whether you want detail to the nth degree, or you need 100 covered hoppers so you can model Canadian National's grain transportation in September of 1999, you can probably find what you need out there. And I think it's only going to get better.
Those are all great companies. And is there another one you might want to mention?
Yeah, there's those guys in Canada. Was it the Rapido? Yeah.
Rapido
I like them.
Rapido Trains, yeah.
I've met Jason a few times. Jason is a great guy. He had a bunch of folks out to the Illinois Railway Museum back in October and got to sit down and chat with him for a while, and that was a lot of fun. If I had to work someplace else in model railroading, I think Rapido would be a great place to work. They look like a bunch of guys having a great time doing a really good job. So I'm glad that we get to work with them, and they're an advertiser for us, as well as sponsoring shows like A Modeler's Life. So.
Yeah. RapidoTrains.com. And there may or may not be a jingle right now.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to hearing that.
Me too. All right. What do you think, Dave? How'd that go?
I think this was a pleasure. I think we would have to do it again sometime.
I think we absolutely are going to have Eric on again and continue to tell us about the adventures of being the editor of Model Railroader.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you let me know.
We will. You'll be the first one we tell when you're going to be on.
That'd be good. Hopefully nobody burns their podcasting reception equipment after they hear my voice for 90 minutes.
No. Who's going to be the guy that edits Dave's next book? What's your next book, Dave?
The next book it's going to be based on model railroad yard design and operation. It's going to be building on Andy Sperandio's concept that's out of print at this point. We're going to weave a bunch more prototype history and some prototype examples into that, as well as look at a bunch of the top model yards around the nation. So it's an exciting time, and that should be out, I believe, Eric, sometime in 2024 is what the way it's set up now. Yep.
So is the book department a completely separate department, or because you worked with Eric on the first book, like Eric, this is a question for you. Will he work with an editor from Model Railroader, or will he work with somebody from the book department?
I'd have to look and see, and I'm not connected to that server right now, so I can't tell you who's going to be the editor for that. It would be one of two people, either Steve Oddie, who is also a senior associate editor for Model Railroader, or it would be Jeff Wilson, who is the longtime books editor and author. So one of those two guys will be your editor, I think, Dave.
Excellent.
And the future is the challenge. You look forward to the challenge of making Model Railroader survive and thrive as the internet age continues to grow and grow.
Yes, absolutely.
Sounds like a fun challenge for the right person.
I think it's going to be a great time, and keep on reading the magazine, check out our website, and have a good time model railroading.
Yeah, and if you ever want to send us an email, Eric, if you ever have a question, if you ever do listen to the podcast, at least you know what the difference between Eric and Phil is. I think Eric actually enjoyed himself. I'm actually gonna contact Phil again. And we'll have you help me, Dave. I'll contact him again, and we'll get him back on the podcast again.
That'll be fun. That guy's a character too. That's a cool railroad though. He does a really nice job with CTC on a single track main line, and it's a lot of fun. I love running at his railroad.
And our buddy Stephen Atwell, the owner of Midwest Model Railroad, he's been over to Phil's house a few times now, so that's kind of cool. So, Eric, if you ever want to send us an email, all you got to do is send it to modelerslife@gmail.com. That's modelers with one L like railroad, not two L's like Lionel.
Okay.
We use the American spelling, not the British spelling.
But you're in Canada, right?
Yes, but the podcast is listened all over the world, so we don't want to be exclusionary.
Okay.
So
very good.
So that's why we went that way. That's why we went in that direction, because all my writing skills were primarily taught to me by George Sebastian Coleman, a one-time associate editor at Model Railroader.
That's right, yes.
Did you ever hear any stories of Keith Thompson? Do you recognize that name at all?
I've heard the name, yeah. I've heard so many stories, and the names start to all meld together. So since I've never met Keith, it's hard to place which stories were Keith, and so I wouldn't want to, since we're, not just actually talking around a couple of beers at a table.
Sure, absolutely. Well,
try to be accurate with what I say.
Keith was also an associate editor there. Unfortunately, he passed away at an early age, but wonderful, wonderful man. I've met so many great people at Model Railroaders, and now I've met another one. So, yeah. Dave, I'm not sure what it was you were talking about. I think Eric's a great guy.
I was trying to tell you that you can't trust me with anything these days.
And if you didn't catch our email address, if you go to our website, amodelerslife.com, and click on the picture of the moderately agitated mailboy in a particularly agitated state, boom. You don't even have to fill out the email address. All you got to do is fill in your subject line and your text, and you're ready to go. And Eric, I know you enjoy listening to podcasts so much, and if you'd like to listen to twice as much of the Modeler's Life every week, this is on the free channel, and we're glad to have it on the free channel. And that's why it's sponsored by Rapido Trains, rapidotrains.com, from the Rapido Train studio. But if you'd like twice as much podcasting from the AML Nation every week, if you just click on the Patreon link on our website, and for just a few cents a day, you can have twice as much podcasting each week and join the Patreon channel.
That sounds like a great idea.
Okay, that's good. I'll sign you up tonight.
Okay.
And also, speaking of Patreon, our very own Uncle Dave Abelese, he's Uncle Dave. You know, everybody has that uncle that you're like, oh, okay, it's Uncle Dave's coming over. Great, this is going to be a good day. Well, you actually are somebody's uncle, aren't you, Dave?
Yes, I have a niece and a nephew, my brother's kids.
There you go. Yes. What was I talking about? Oh yeah.
Well, videos.
Yeah. The Onondaga Cutoff Patreon channel.
Yep, I have some videos up on the Onondaga Cutoff Patreon channel. Some stuff that I put together for people that want to know more about the Onondaga Cutoff as a compliment to some of the articles I've written. And there's also some Onondaga Cutoff videos that are up on trains.com, which Eric mentioned earlier tonight. So there's a lot of different ways to get in touch and a lot of different ways to stay current. But we're excited. There's a lot of good stuff to come. I think it's a really exciting time for the hobby, and I think we've heard that resoundingly tonight from the guy in charge of the biggest brand in the hobby, Model Railroader.
Oh, yeah, I'd say that's a true statement. It's the biggest brand in the hobby. Eric, you're in charge of the biggest brand in the hobby. You're steering the ship, buddy. Don't hit the dock.
Full speed ahead.
There you go. I was going to say something else. Don't tell me. It was really. Oh yeah, Dave, you got a YouTube channel too.
I do have a YouTube channel, and I'm going to be putting a couple other videos on that here as the winter gets on. Eric made a good point that there's a lot of good products coming out, stuff that was tied up in the logistics of the pandemic, and I'm excited too because as things settle in. This winter's modeling season is upon us here as the days are short, and once we get through the holidays, there's some fun stuff that'll be going on, and it's going to be fun to be able to get some more videos up on YouTube and help spread the brand. And I think this year I will also be attending the Springfield show, the Big E.
That's right.
So that should be fun to see people up there in a couple months.
You're gonna have
lots of good stuff.
We have our own display. We have 3 tables there at Springfield at City Classics original home. He was there for over 30 years, and John Sacerdoti has been kind enough to let us take over that spot. So we're going to even give you your own table there where people can come by and say hi.
And hopefully, if they bring their book along, I'd be glad to sign the book while we're there too.
Yeah, won't that be cool? Are you going to that show, Eric?
I will not be there this year. In fact, I will be at the RPM meet down in Cocoa Beach in early January. So that'll be my next trip out.
I might be there too. Can I? Okay. Would it be okay if I came up and said hi?
It would absolutely be okay.
What if I stick a microphone in your face and talk to you? Would you do that too?
Well, if I'm eating green shrimp, then who knows what could happen.
No, blue and yellow shrimp.
Yeah, blue and yellow. Yeah, there you go.
Once you mash them all up, they turn green, right?
Yeah, there you go. Right. Yep. I like it.
I think we covered everything, didn't we, Dave?
I think so.
All right, Eric. Now, at the appropriate moment, we need you to say happy rails to you. Now, the key to this is there's no singing, there's no dancing, there's no interpretation whatsoever. All we need is an enthusiastic, happy rails to you. Do you think you can do that?
I think I can do that.
All right. Well, Eric, as we close the barn doors on another episode of A Modeler's Life, and the sun slowly sets over the back 40, I guess there's nothing else left to do except for you to say,
happy rails to you.
While in Busted Knuckle, guests of A Modeler's Life podcast stay at the Casa del Sol Motor Court and Inn, where late night dancing at the Rumba Room is a magical event to be experienced.
It's another Lincoln Homer.
was excellent.
That was a good one.
That was great. That was a
Well,
fun
thank you.
time. That was a fun chat. Look at that.
Yes.
We killed 2 hours.
Not bad.
Yeah. And we didn't even there's just so much more to talk about too.
It's
Sure.
amazing. This hobby is the best thing that's ever been created. It's awesome.